Welcome, Al Pacino and Joe Pesci. The audience burst into applause. What inspired you to make this movie? Al Pacino leaned into the microphone. It's personal, Edward. My parents are immigrants from Sicily, and I saw their struggle in the Bronx. This movie is about the dignity of people who don't give up. Edward turned to Joe. Joe, what about you? Pesci smiled. It grew up in Newark among Italians. This return to my roots is a struggle, but also a joy. Family dinners, laughter. The audience applauded. Edward continued. Did your roles in The Godfather or Goodfellas help you with your documentary? Al nodded. Yes, when I played Michael Corleone, I thought about my grandfather. We talked to people like the 80-year-old woman who came with $2 and raised 5 children. Her story is the heart of the movie. Joe added. Form, it's like playing Street Kids. We met people who have turned their anger into creativity, businesses, communities. It's inspiring. Edward delved deeper. Immigration is a hot topic. Did you want to say something about the present? Al answered firmly. Prejudice still exists. Our film reminds us that statistically speaking, people with dreams are the majority. Joe was more blunt. Politicians divide. We showed unity not only of Italians, but of everyone who is looking for a better life. The audience gave a standing ovation. Edward added some lightness. Any funny moments on the set? Al laughed. Joe made everyone eat his aunt's ravioli for 2 days. Joe replied. Undull argued about the camera angle to make it look dramatic. The audience laughed. Edward asked, what have you learned from each other? Al. Joe eyes straight forward. He taught me to tell the truth. Joe. Alice depth. But sometimes it slows you down. Al raised an eyebrow. Slows you down? It's thoroughness, Joe. Edward interjected. About the scene with the activist Marco. What did she do? Al. Marquois fighting for rights in Brooklyn. He reminded us that young people take action. Joe sharply. Marco was cool, but you, Al, made the conversation your monologue. I was sitting there like a set piece. Al. Monologue, I was developing ideas. You could have added something instead of sitting there with a sour face. Joe louder. You never gave me a chance. You always take everything into your own hands. Edward. Guys. Al quietly but sharply. If you felt like furniture. Joe, maybe it was because you were complaining instead of working? Joe. Complaining. I was saving the scenes you were rewriting because I thought I was smarter than you. You won't believe how this interview will end, but you can share your guesses in the comments, and we'll continue. You know, Joe, Al began, his voice low but sharp as a blade. If you're so unhappy, I'll say it straight. Maybe this project would have been better if Robert De Niro had taken your role. What did you say? Joe slowly turned to Pacino, his voice trembling with rage. Are you serious? You're sitting here in front of all these people, saying you'd rather have De Niro? You think I'm some kind of substitute? Al didn't look away, his face impassive, but his fingers gripped the edge of the table. I said what I think. Bobby has a depth that could have given this project a different shade. You're a good actor, Joe, but you were fighting my vision the whole time. Joe shot up from his chair, his jacket slipping off one shoulder. He jabbed a finger at Pacino, his voice rising to a shout. Your vision? Your damn vision. You think you're the only one who gets this film? I poured my soul into it, Al. And you just wanted everyone to dance to your tune. And now you have the nerve to say, I don't measure up to De Niro? But Joe cut in, his eyes blazing. No, Edward, I'm not calming down. This man just told the whole country I'm not on De Niro's level. You want to know why I was rebelling, Al? Because you acted like I was your subordinate, not your partner. You rewrote my scenes, ignored my ideas, and now you got the gall to say I'm not the one you needed? Al leaned back in his chair, his lips pressed into a thin line. But when he spoke, his voice was cold, almost disdainful. Joe, you're working yourself up. I didn't say you're a bad actor. I said Bobby could have fit my concept better. You argued, complained, and slowed down the shoot. How was I supposed to work with that attitude? Joe laughed, but it was a bitter, almost hysterical laugh. He threw his hands out, addressing the audience. Hear that, folks? He's blaming me. I was complaining because he put himself above everyone, the director, the producers, me. You think you're some kind of Spielberg, Al? You're just an actor, like me. And you know what? Maybe you should have gone to De Niro if I'm so bad. The audience began whispering louder, some grabbing their phones, likely to post about it on social media. Linda Crow, the producer, stood backstage, her face pale. She whispered something to an assistant, but didn't dare intervene. Edward tried again to take control, his voice firmer. All right, let's get back to the film. You both. But Al raised a hand, stopping him. His eyes stayed locked on Joe. No, Edward, let him say what he wants. If Joe thinks I'm putting him down, let him get it out. But I'll tell you one thing, Joe, I fought for this project while you spent half the shoot sulking. And if you don't like that I compared you to Bobby, maybe think about why I said it. Joe took a step toward Pacino, his fists clenched. Why? Because you're jealous, Al. You've always been jealous of anyone who doesn't bow to you. I saw how you looked at me during filming, like I wasn't worthy to stand next to you. And now you dare humiliate me in front of all these people? The audience erupted in whispers and gasps. A man in the back, wearing a Yankees cap, shouted, "Come on guys, calm down." But his voice was drowned out by the general buzz. Edward stood from his chair, his hands trembling. Al, Joe, this isn't what we're here for. Your film is about unity, about fighting injustice. Let's show people you can be bigger than this. Joe spun toward Edward, his voice hoarse. Unity? He just said he'd rather have De Niro. What unity, Edward? He spat in my face in front of the whole country. Al stood slowly, his movements calm, but his eyes burned with a storm. I didn't spit in your face, Joe. I told the truth. And if you can't handle it, that's your problem. I was trying to make this film more than just another project. But it seems your ego matters more. Joe jabbed a finger at Pacino, his voice breaking into a shout. My ego? You're a hypocrite, Al. You acted like you were the only one who cared about this film. I gave it everything, and you just wanted everyone to see only you. The tension hit its peak. The audience sat frozen, unsure if Joe would lunge at Pacino or if Al would fire back even harder. Edward, his forehead slick with sweat, tried one last time. Guys, I'm begging you, sit down. Let's talk about what unites you, not what divides you. But Joe just shook his head, his eyes gleaming with anger and pain. Unites? After this? I'm done, Edward. Let-o run his show alone. He turned sharply and stormed off the stage, his footsteps echoing loudly in the silence. The backstage door slammed, and the audience erupted in whispers. Al remained seated, his face unreadable, but his fingers trembled. Edward turned to the audience, his voice weak. Well, it seems we need a moment to regroup. Edward Murray, the host with graying temples, tried to salvage the situation. His voice trembled, but he forced a smile. Well, folks, it seems we've had an unexpected moment. But we'll carry on. Al, I know this is a tough spot, but let's talk about your film. Why is it so important to you? Al slowly raised his eyes, his gaze heavy but filled with determination. He leaned into the microphone, his voice quiet but firm. Edward, this film is about people who face injustice every day. About immigrants who come here with dreams and run into prejudice. I stayed here because I believe we can talk about this, even when emotions run high. I don't want our argument to overshadow this story. The audience listened, holding their breath. Some nodded, feeling respect for Pacino for not storming off after Pesci. A woman in the front row, with gray hair and glasses, wiped a tear, whispering to her neighbor. He's holding it together like a true professional. But the tension in the room didn't ease. Everyone knew the fight between the two legends was an event that would be talked about for weeks. Al continued, his voice growing steadier. You know, I grew up in the Bronx, watching my family struggle. This film is my way of saying, we can all be better. We can listen to each other, even when we're angry. I hope that Joe, he paused, his eyes darkening for a moment, that Joe will one day understand why I care so much about this project. The audience erupted in applause. Edward exhaled with relief, sensing that Pacino had steered the conversation back to something constructive. But backstage, Linda Crow, the producer, bit her lip, knowing a real storm was brewing outside the studio. Meanwhile, on the street in front of the skyscraper housing the studio, a cold autumn wind swept leaves across the sidewalk. Joe Pesci burst out of the building, his jacket flapping, his face red with anger. He ignored the shouts of security guards trying to hold him back and headed for a black SUV parked nearby. But before he could take more than a few steps, a swarm of journalists who had been waiting by the entrance surrounded him. Microphones, cameras, and flashes engulfed him like a hive of bees. Mr. Pesci, Joe, shouted a young reporter from TMZ, thrusting a microphone forward. What happened in the studio? Why did you leave? Joe stopped, his eyes blazing with fury. He tried to push through, but the journalist didn't budge, blocking his path. A reporter from the New York Post, a man with a notepad, called out, "How will this interview change your relationship with Al Pacino?" Joe spun around, his fists clenched. He glared at the crowd, his breathing heavy. For a moment, it seemed he might just walk away, but then he spoke, his voice hoarse and dripping with bitterness. My relationship with Al Pacino? He laughed, but the laugh was as cold as the autumn wind. I'll tell you what I think. Al Pacino is a selfish hypocrite who thinks he's better than everyone else. He humiliated me in front of the entire country, saying he'd rather have De Niro, like I'm some second-rate actor. The journalists gasped, their cameras whirring to capture every word. The TMZ reporter jumped closer. You're saying Pacino humiliated you? Humiliated? Joe jabbed a finger toward the building, his voice breaking into a shout. He spat in my face. We worked together. I gave everything to this film, and he acted like I was his servant. He rewrote my scenes, ignored my ideas, and now he dares say I don't measure up to De Niro. I respected him, thought we were partners, but he's just a jealous snob who wants to overshadow everyone. The crowd of journalists exploded with questions, but Joe raised a hand, his eyes burning. I'm done with him. Done with this project. If Al thinks he can treat me like this, let him make his film alone. I won't be his shadow. He turned sharply, pushed through the crowd, and climbed into the SUV. The door slammed and the car sped off, leaving the journalists buzzing like a disturbed hive. Reporters were already typing headlines. Pesci cuts ties with Pacino after live interview scandal. Back in the studio, the interview was nearing its end. Al Pacino, despite the inner turmoil, held himself with dignity. He answered Edward's questions about the film, talking about the young activists they worked with and how their stories reminded him of his own childhood. But his voice was quieter than at the start, and his eyes occasionally flicked toward the door Joe had stormed through. Edward, sensing it was time to wrap up, turned to the audience. Al, you've shown us today that even in tough moments, you can stay true to your purpose. Is there anything you'd like to say to the viewers at home? Al took a deep breath, his fingers relaxing. He looked into the camera, his gaze sincere but tinged with pain. I want to say that we all make mistakes. I'm not perfect, and maybe I said something I shouldn't have. But I believe we can learn from each other, even when we're angry. This film is about people overcoming barriers. And I hope that Joe and I, he paused, his voice trembling slightly, that we can still talk. Not for the cameras, but as people. The audience erupted in applause, some wiping tears. Edward smiled, though his eyes betrayed concern. Thank you, Al, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. The cameras cut off, but the buzz in the room didn't stop. The audience stood, discussing what had just happened. A man in a Yankees cap muttered, Pacino held it together, but Pesci. Wow, that was intense. A woman nearby nodded, whispering, "Maybe they'll make up." Backstage, Linda Crow clutched her phone, scrolling through the first headlines online. Her face was pale. The scandal was already spreading across the internet, and she knew this was just the beginning. Al Pacino left the studio quietly, ignoring assistants trying to speak with him. In his eyes was something new, not anger, not regret, but a quiet hope that, perhaps, a small step toward dialogue was still possible. But Joe Pesci's words, hurled at the journalists on the street, echoed through the airwaves like a reverberation. Would these two legends ever find common ground? Or would their falling out become yet another tale of pride and misunderstanding tearing everything apart? The door remained open, but the path to reconciliation seemed long and uncertain.